Welcome. This is Najma Minhas with Global Village Space. I'm joined today by Dr. Intikhab Ahmed, who is a community psychiatrist working with New Jersey State with the underprivileged with chronic mental health issues. And suicide prevention is a very important part of his job. Today, with him, we're going to look at some of the general factors that may lead to suicide and how immigrant communities, such as the Pakistani community, may suffer from this. He also has some very interesting views on former Prime Minister Imran Khan, so I'm hoping he'll share those with us as well. And he is from Pakistan, but he's lived in Canada and the United States. So I'm really hoping that he's going to bring the different perspective from these different countries into sharing these views with us. Dr. Intikhab, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Najma, for the opportunity. It's my pleasure.
So I'd like to start with this general concept of suicide and what are the factors that lead to suicide? Can you give us a general broad overview on that?
Sure. There are many factors that can lead to suicide. Some of the most common factors that could contribute to suicide is, for example, number one is, of course, the presence of chronic mental illness. For example, major depression or bipolar disorder. Secondly, if there is a family history of suicide, meaning if there is a genetic predisposition, if you have a chronic medical condition, especially if it is a debilitating medical condition, and also, for example, if it is a chronic pain, that can increase the risk. And recently, what we are looking at is the use of recreational substances, for example, alcohol, cannabis, and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, one of the most important factors to consider are the environmental changes. For example, relationships, any separation, divorce, any financial crunches, or, for example, if there is a collapse of the support system. So all of these factors, all of the above could lead to increased risk of suicide.
So how do you go about mitigating anybody who is susceptible to suicide?
Yeah. So it's a great question. If not all, many suicides can be prevented. It depends on the accurate and the timely diagnosis. You provide appropriate treatment. And of course, a follow-up is very, very important. And then strengthening the support system. And that being said, as suicides can be prevented, but there are many cases. We have seen many patients over the years who are doing extremely well and suddenly complete suicide. So there is no black and white answer. But again, with these interventions, you can prevent.
What are the largest percentage, though, when we see suicides? Is there a particular factor which accounts for the largest percentage of suicides?
As I mentioned, it is not just one factor. It is an accumulative effect of many factors that I already mentioned, but certain age groups are at very high risk. For example, elderly patient population, these are at very high risk. Similarly, what we are seeing recently, there is an increase in suicide among middle-aged men in the United States. So,
right. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, so it's all of the above. There are many factors that accumulate over time and can increase the risk.
You mentioned, for example, that elderly people are more susceptible to suicide. Is that a function of living in America, or is that across all societies? I mean, in Pakistan, for example, if someone was living in Pakistan, would you say that suicide is more likely to happen in Pakistan as well amongst the elderly? Or is there a totally different set of reasons that suicide might happen in Pakistan?
So, I mean, I guess that in general, in Pakistani society, the statistics show the rate of the suicide is definitely not as higher as compared to United States. And there are many factors. I think our culture, our tradition, and our support system these are the factors that are really that protect against the suicide. And in general, elderly patients, they have chronic medical issues. They have many social factors. For example, loneliness, if you are a widower, or so all these factors can increase. But I think in general, looking at Pakistani culture and tradition, there are many protective factors in place.
Okay, so you mentioned the environmental factors that are very important in suicide. So when we look at immigrant communities, I mean, does that fall into a change of environment? And how do immigrant communities in the United States, let's stay with the United States first, how do you see immigrant communities suicide levels vis-a-vis the domestic population who've been living here already?
So, in general, the immigrants, United States has accepted immigrants from all over the world, including Pakistan, and in general, people who come here, they overall they do extremely well. I mean, there are cases here and there, but by nature, if you are immigrating, you are leaving one country to another, you have this motivation to succeed, and you have some underlying resilience, and you have that mental endurance. So these are all the protective factors. But of course, there are situations when immigration is very, very difficult. But if you have really a good support system around and you have that inner resilience, that can help.
Very interesting. So you mentioned the difference between, let's say, the older generation and the younger generation. If we come to Pakistan as well, is that the same? I mean, how you're saying in the United States that the older generation is probably slightly more likely to commit suicides. Now, in Pakistan, is it still the older generation, or is there a difference in suicide in Pakistan?
So I guess in Pakistan, the data that I have looked at recently, it is variable. The issue is really the reporting. The lot of the
Sorry, the issue is what?
a lot of the data is not really
Okay.
reported accurately.
Okay.
So there are many deaths probably that could
Right.
be, that could be possibly. But in general, I think that there are many protective factors in place that I have already mentioned. But you really need to have a good diagnosis, good reporting system, so that you can have an accurate data.
Right. So, as such, you're saying that in Pakistan, we cannot analyze whether there is a preponderance of suicides amongst one group rather than the other because we just haven't been collecting the data.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, very interesting.
And I think that it is important to really you have a
Right.
comprehensive mental health policy, and you
Right.
have to have these mental health services where you look at these cases and the accurate data is collected.
So it's very interesting you mentioned, once again, I'm going to go back to the environmental factors. I have increasingly heard amongst my friends and many people I know, they say, I don't like watching TV any longer in Pakistan. You know, it's depressing when we put the TV on. So I want to get your thoughts on what's happened. There's been a huge amount of stress and tension in Pakistan on the street as well as on TV. We're seeing it, replicated on TV on what's been happening the past 4 to 5, 6 months, right? What impact would that have on someone's psychological well-being? Does it impact their psychological well-being?
So, to answer this, so let's look at the current political and the social dynamics in Pakistan that is evolving. 65% of Pakistani population is less than 30, very young.
Right.
So over the last 3 decades, a new generation has emerged. And this generation is different from the past because they are well aware of their rights.
Okay.
They are aware of the local and the international politics. They are aware of their very computer savvy. And politically, if you look at we are still have so-called the old guards in the politics, and they continue to operate the way they operated in 30, 40 years ago. And they have not really understood that the social and the political fabric in the country has changed. So if you look at last 6 months, it is very interesting that you have an elected government, a relatively popular prime minister then, that his government is toppled by those who are under trial.
Okay.
And then secondly, you also see something very interesting, that not only the government is toppled, but you see special accommodations are being made for those who are convicts, and these
Right.
are powerful people.
Right.
So what it does, how does it impact human psyche? It
Okay.
creates mistrust towards the institutions, towards the judiciary, towards the establishment.
Right.
And then people are upset because they know that it is not accurate why this is happening. So you, and then the next question is that how the masses are going to protest. So you see this huge public gatherings, the
Mm.
rallies, and all these public protests, and then most importantly, the right to vote. So
Mm.
what you saw recently in Punjab, there was a heavy turnout because it is a way for them to express their anger and
Right.
also the sense of injustice. So heavy turnout, but then there is another very interesting dynamics here. It is a well-known fact that in Pakistan the elections are rigged,
Right.
and most of the time they already have a desired outcome. So what happens? You have a right to protest and you protest through your vote, but you take that right away.
Right.
So it makes people helpless
Mm.
and they feel hopeless that, you know
So,
what?
how is that impacting their psyche then? I mean, if we take it to that psychiatric angle, the psychological angle, you've talked about mistrust, you've talked about anger, you've talked about, hopelessness. How is that impacting the individual and their family on a day-to-day basis? Is it actually impacting them, or are we all oblivious to it and blasé about it because we're so used to it? I remember I was in Pakistan in 2008 and 9 and 10, especially when we had huge number of attacks happening in the cities in Pakistan. And after a while, first of all, the numbers shocked you. And after a while, you just kind of carried on with your life. So does it impact us when we see this constant mistrust and so on happening on a daily
Yes,
basis?
because I mean, what you are seeing around it is a political uncertainty.
Mm.
Of course, the day-to-day operations of the government depend on the welfare of ordinary people.
Right.
So when there are limited opportunities for employment, young graduates coming out of schools, they do not get the
Mm.
jobs that they desire. So when all of these elements add up, this
Mm.
mistrust, this hopelessness, this
Mm.
helplessness, resentful, people are angry and hostility. These are all the risk factors for
Mm.
mental health issues. So eventually it impacts your day-to-day functioning. It impacts your relationships. It impacts your performance in school and at work. And as I said, so there's a direct correlation of environmental factors for mental health issues. So once your mind is affected, for us to operate,
Right.
the equilibrium between mind and body is very important. When you are under stress, it definitely leads to changes in your neuro, all the chemicals in the brain, what we call the neurotransmitters, and that can potentially lead to mental disorders, like, for example, depression and anxiety. And then, of course, the productivity is affected. And when you apply to the whole masses, then it affects the nation in general.
Mm. Do you think the young are more likely, more susceptible to this than the older in Pakistan?
I
Or
mean,
is it vice versa?
I think that the younger minds are more they are more reactive.
Right.
The younger minds, as I said, the 65% of the population is under 30. They perceive this injustice differently. They perceive this mistrust differently there as compared to the population that is relatively
Why do
older.
they perceive it more differently than the general population?
Because it depends. It is there. As you, of course, as you progress in different stages of life,
Mm.
you have different defense mechanisms to cope. But when you are growing up, you are, the right word to say is that you are still in the phase of learning, that how you really develop those skills to tolerate this uncertainty and this chaos around you. As we
Mm.
grow older, of course, we are better equipped psychologically
Mm.
to deal with this.
The fact that you mentioned that the young feel this differently, do you think when we hear a lot about how everyone who's 18 and beyond who will go for voting, political analysts all talk about the fact that they will support the PTI in larger numbers. Do you think that is why it's that lack of justice, the hopelessness? Is that what's making them support the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, or do you think there's other reasons?
So I think that, again, it is very important to see there is a reason.
Mm.
The younger generation, as I mentioned earlier, that they are looking for someone to fill this vacuum. You have on one side, these are the old guards of the politics. And also it depends that so in psychiatry or in psychology, what we have, what we call is idealization or role modeling.
Okay.
So younger minds try to follow those or idealize those that they want to be like. So where Imran Khan fits in this picture?
Okay.
So Imran Khan is someone that who has offered something very different as compared to many other leaders. So what Imran Khan, first of all, that he is someone that who does not belong to any feudal or industrial background.
Okay.
He rose through the ranks like ordinary people, and he does not represent a political dynasty. So, what you call that he can walk the walk and he can talk the talk.
Right.
He has gone through all these stages. So, these are the things that younger minds tend to idealize. Then, of course, that he's charismatic, he is fit. There are many other personal characteristics that people tend to follow. And then I think it is also very important that the narrative that he has built over the years, why does it really resonate with younger minds? Because what he's offering them hope.
Okay.
He's telling them repetitively that there is an injustice around you, and you can overcome this injustice.
Okay, but when you say hope, what is he offering more than any other party when you say hope? I mean, if we currently we have a government, they're talking about how to improve the economy, they're going to talk about how to give jobs. So, what is the difference that he's offering the youth that you're referring to versus another party leader
Because
or another younger party leader? Let's say maybe it's Maria, maybe it's Bilawal. So, what is it that he's offering the youth more than some of the other younger leaders, in your words?
it is the issue of trust. Because what Imran Khan, he does not represent a political dynasty. The others have been tried multiple times, whether their parents or the new generation, as I said. So, what Imran Khan, he's different. It is the matter of trust. And another thing is that people have accepted this fact that he's honest. No matter what you say, there is one. So, it is the matter of it is the issue of trust and feeling safe. And especially over last 6 months, the most important narrative that he has built, that I am standing up against the superpower. So he ignites very strong patriotic sentiments, and also, and this personifies his strength as a strong leader. So young minds resonate with that. Here is someone who has no baggage, there is no corruption. He is someone who does not represent a political family, and he has nothing to gain out of this for himself, because they know that he had everything before he came. So, this really creates a safe zone for them, for someone they can trust, even though there were many questions about his delivery when he
Right.
was in the government, but people are upset.
So I want to get your thoughts on Imran Khan himself. Psychologically, what is it that he has kept him going for the past? We hear about the fact that his struggle was going nowhere. And the last 6 months in particular, when many, many people would have given up and they expected that he would give up as well. Maybe that was the thought process, but he didn't give up. So what is it psychologically that you feel you see in him that keeps him the way he is, that he doesn't seem to give up?
So Imran Khan, he offers some very extraordinary and the rare qualities. There is, what you see is, there is unshakable resolve and determination. There is a remarkable tenacity. There is a tremendous mental and physical endurance. There is a
Right.
discipline. There is a hard work, leading by an example. And many of these traits are genetic, that
Okay.
you are born with this. And as you can see, that every nation at some point has someone who comes and changes the course of the history, because they have this genetic loading of some extraordinary qualities. And of course, their life experiences, the opportunities, and these all these things shape their characters
mm,
and transform them into legends. But there is an interesting spin to that. When we are all witnessing these characters, we are not aware of their enormity and the impact they are making at the course of the history. For example, Qaid-e-Azam, Gandhi, Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, all these people did get recognition a lot later. So what happens that after many years, nations have a way, they process what happened over the last 40 to 50 years,
okay.
and then historians deliver a verdict, and then you see that you understand who these people were who changed the course of history. And I wanted to mention one more point about Imran Khan, that psychologically, to understand him better, by nature he's an athlete. Not everyone can be an athlete, and then some are super athletes. Like, for
Mhm,
example, we had Michael Jordan. And all these athletes have a competitive streak, meaning they just do not want to lose. So every time they lose the game, the next day they regroup and they are ready to bounce back.
mm,
And it is also important to understand that psychologically how Imran Khan looks at his failures, disappointments, and lack of success. He looks at them, and for him, the meaning is different.
mm,
These are the catalysts for him to pursue success. He has even acknowledged himself, you learn from your mistakes.
mm,
Behind his mind, at every step, he wants to win, no matter what.
mm,
So the more you put him against the wall,
mm.
the more the odds are against him,
Okay.
the more he's going to bounce back, because that is who he is. That is an inborn character that has shaped over the years.
Okay.
Now, for the politicians, you are how to really engage him. The more you put him against the wall, you will have no luck.
Okay.
The best thing is engage him in the political arena with the dialogue.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, so final point, I just want to take you back to the diaspora community that we see across the world. They have huge emotional links still with Pakistan. You see that, supporters of various political parties, they still talk about politics. They're very actively involved. They send money back home to political parties as well. Why is it? Why is there such a strong emotional link that these Pakistanis who may have left the country 40, 50 years ago, why do they still keep that emotional link? I mean, I'm sure, is it the same across all diaspora communities? And what's behind that link?
I think that the natural link, especially for the first generation of immigrants, is very, very strong. And you just cannot forget your roots.
Hmm,
And no matter how far where you are from, and all these communities, and this is not just Pakistani community,
hmm,
in United States, Canada, or even in Europe, there are, especially in United States, we see immigrants from all over the world. Over
right.
the years, I have seen, working with many physicians and colleagues, that the first generation does have this very, very strong link, because this is who you are. No matter what, you cannot forget your roots. But
Hmm,
I think as the generations move across from next to third, it it slowly starts disseminating.
right.
But for the first generation, the link, it is, and it will always stay very strong. And I think that when in general, most of the communities, especially in Pakistan or other, are very successful, there is also a moral obligation that you feel at some point, that where you are, it is because of that country where you were born. For example, as a physician, I am always obligated to Pakistan what that country offered me, my medical
Right.
education, no matter what. So there is a moral obligation to really wish best for your country, to do best for your country. And I know that recently things have become politicized because of the funding and all that, but it should not really take away a positive sentiment that you
Hmm,
want to make a difference in the country where you come from.
hmm.
So that's, I guess, is the reason that,
And how would you increase the links of the second and third generations back to the immigrants' original country?
yeah, some of it has to do with how much you engage your second generation, your children and their children, how much they are really aware of their parents or their grandparents' road. I think it is a matter of, I would say it is individualized. It depends on your what environment your family is, what culture you are in. So it is very individualized. I have seen second and third generation who are still very linked. They have a lot of respect for their parents and where they come from. And in some other cases, it is different. So it all depends how is the culture within your own family, within your own home.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Intikhab.
Thank you very much.